The year was 2347, and humanity had spent nearly 2 centuries being the galaxy's friendliest neighbors. They smiled at every diplomatic meeting. They traded fairly with every species. They kept their military small and defensive. The aliens of the Galactic Confederation looked at humans and saw a young, emotional, somewhat primitive species, harmless, eager to please. Easy to ignore, Commander Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the Earth vessel Reckoning, her hands gripping the console in front of her as distress signals flooded every channel. Colony Horizon was burning. 30,000 human civilians lived on that moon orbiting Kepler 44b. Families had built homes there. Children had been born there. Schools and hospitals and parks had been constructed with care and hope. Now it was all on fire. The Vorthax. Dominion had decided they wanted the resources beneath Colony Horizon's surface. They had not asked. They had not negotiated. They had simply arrived with their war fleet and begun the slaughter. The images coming through the emergency channels made Lisa's stomach turn. Buildings collapsed into rubble. People ran screaming through streets that had been peaceful just hours before. Vorthax soldiers marched through the wreckage, shooting anyone who moved. Lieutenant Danny Ortiz turned from his sensor station, his face pale. "Commander, we're receiving updated casualty reports. At least 3,000 dead already. They're targeting civilian shelters." Lisa closed her eyes for just a moment. 3,000 souls. Gone. For what? For minerals in the ground that the Vorthax could have simply purchased through normal trade channels? The communication system crackled, and Admiral Pete Morrison's voice filled the bridge. He was the head of Earth's Defense Command, a man who had spent 40 years maintaining peace through careful diplomacy. His voice now carried a weight that Lisa had never heard before. "All Earth defense vessels, this is Central Command. The Vorthax have rejected our diplomatic protests. They've stated that humanity is too weak to matter. They claim that we have no right to any territory they desire, and that they'll take whatever they want from us." Every officer on the bridge went still. Not with fear. Lisa recognized the look in their eyes. It was something else. Something older. Something that humans had tried very hard to forget they were capable of feeling. "They've given us 72 hours to withdraw all claims to the Kepler system," Morrison continued. Their ambassador literally laughed when delivering the message. He said that humans should stick to farming and trading and leave real power to real warriors. Danny Ortiz let out a low sound that might have been a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Admiral, with respect, have these Vorthax idiots ever read a human history book?" There was a long pause before Morrison responded. "They have not, Lieutenant. They've only observed us for 200 years. They've seen the version of humanity we chose to show the galaxy. The peaceful version, the friendly version, the version that doesn't build weapons capable of cracking planets in half, because such things are unnecessary for a species committed to cooperation." Lisa felt something shifting in her chest. A door that had been locked for her entire life was beginning to open. Behind that door was something dark and patient, something that had been waiting a very long time. "The Vorthax believe that what they've seen is all there is to humanity," Morrison said. "They believe we're soft, weak, incapable of real violence." His voice dropped lower. "They are about to learn how wrong they are." Commander Grant Morrison continued, and Lisa straightened at the sudden formality. "You are being promoted to Fleet Admiral, effective immediately. The Earth Defense Council has met in emergency session. They have authorized Protocol Omega." The bridge fell into absolute silence. Lisa heard someone behind her suck in a sharp breath. Protocol Omega. She had learned about it during her officer training, mentioned only briefly, described only in the vaguest terms. It was the contingency plan that humanity had written over a century ago and never used. The plan that would unlock every sealed vault, every forbidden research facility, every weapon that humans had developed during the dark ages of their history and then locked away in shame. "Admiral Morrison," Lisa said carefully, "am I to understand that all restrictions are being lifted?" "All of them, Admiral Grant. Every vault is being opened as we speak. Every sealed database is being unlocked. Every retired weapons scientist is being recalled to active duty. Morrison paused, and when he spoke again, there was something ancient and terrible in his voice. Something that reminded Lisa of her grandfather's stories about the old wars. Before humans had unified and decided to be better than their ancestors. The Council's message is simple, Admiral. For 200 years, we've been holding back. We've been playing nice. We've been pretending to be something we're not because we were ashamed of what we truly are. Lisa waited, her heart pounding. The Vorthax have given us a gift, Morrison said. They've given us permission to stop pretending. They've given us a reason. His voice hardened into something like steel. Finally, a reason to get really nasty. The channel closed, and Lisa stood in silence for a long moment. Around her, her crew waited, watching her with expressions that ranged from shock to anticipation to something that looked almost like hunger. She thought about Colony Horizon, about the families huddled in shelters while Vorthok soldiers hunted them, about the children who would never grow up, about the message the Vorthax had sent by choosing to attack without warning, without provocation, without even the basic decency of a declaration of war. They thought humans were weak. They thought 2 centuries of peace meant humanity had forgotten how to fight. They had no idea that humanity hadn't forgotten anything. They had simply chosen not to remember, chosen to be better, chosen to lock away the demons of their past and build something new. But the demons were still there, waiting in the darkness, and now the doors were opening. Lisa turned to face her crew. You heard the Admiral? Protocol Omega is active. That means everything changes starting now. She looked at each of them in turn, seeing the same dark understanding in every pair of eyes. I want all departments to begin reviewing the newly unlocked databases. I want weapons systems upgraded to full offensive capability. I want our stealth systems activated. Danny Ortiz grinned, and it was not a pleasant expression. Admiral, the Vorthax think they're hunting civilians on a horizon. They have no idea that they just woke up something that's been sleeping for 200 years. Lisa nodded slowly. No, they don't. But they're about to find out. She looked out the viewport at the stars, toward the distant system where her people were dying. Set course for the Kepler system, maximum speed, and start sending a message to every human military vessel in range. What message, Admiral? Danny asked. Lisa's expression could have frozen the void of space. Tell them the leash is off. Tell them it's time to remind the galaxy why humanity decided to be peaceful in the first place. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over her crew. It wasn't because we couldn't fight. It was because when we fight, we don't know how to stop. The reckoning turned toward Kepler, its engines burning bright against the darkness. Carrying humanity's answer to the Vorthax challenge, behind it, across human space, sealed vaults were opening for the first time in over a century. Scientists were dusting off research projects that had been abandoned in horror. Military commanders, reading files that had been classified at the highest levels, and somewhere in the collective soul of humanity, something old and patient and very, very dangerous was beginning to smile, deep beneath the red surface of Mars. In tunnels that had been sealed for 150 years, ancient doors groaned as their locks disengaged for the first time since humanity had decided to become civilized. Dr. Kevin Huang walked through the dusty corridors alongside newly promoted Admiral Lisa Grant, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As Earth's leading weapons historian, he was one of the very few people who truly understood what humanity had buried in these vaults. He had spent 30 years studying the sealed records, reading the horrified reports of scientists who had created things they wished they could forget. During the unification wars of the 22nd century, Kevin explained as they descended deeper into the facility. Humanity was at war with itself for nearly 60 years. Nation fought nation. Ideology fought ideology. And during those 6 decades, humans developed weapons that made nuclear bombs look like children's toys. Lisa nodded grimly, her eyes scanning the endless rows of sealed containers that lined the walls. Each one carried warning labels in a dozen languages, along with classification codes that most humans had never seen. We built machines that could think faster than any human mind and whose only purpose was finding new ways to kill. Kevin continued. We created biological agents designed to attack specific genetic markers, meaning you could release a plague that would kill every member of a particular ethnic group while leaving everyone else untouched. We developed psychological weapons that could drive entire populations insane with a single broadcast. And when the wars ended, Lisa said quietly, we locked it all away, because we were ashamed, Kevin confirmed. When humanity finally achieved peace, we looked at what we had created and felt sick. What kind of species builds weapons like these? What kind of minds, Dre? Am up such horrors? He shook his head slowly. So we buried everything. We sealed the vaults, classified the records, and made ourselves forget. We decided that no species capable of such evil deserved to spread across the stars without first proving they could be better. Entered a massive chamber that stretched so far into the darkness that Lisa couldn't see the walls. Row after row of storage containers stood like silent soldiers, each one containing something that humanity had been too afraid to destroy but too ashamed to remember. Kevin stopped beside one of the containers and read its label aloud. Project Nightmare. This one contains a neural disruption system that induces the target's worst fears as a lived reality. It doesn't kill directly. Instead, it forces the victim's brain to generate hallucinations so terrifying that the victim's own body shuts down. Heart attacks, strokes, complete psychological collapse. The weapon itself is completely non-lethal. The human mind does all the killing. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. How effective is it? In testing, it achieved a 97% incapacitation rate within 30 seconds of exposure. The 3% who survived were permanently insane. Kevin moved to the next container. Project Harvest. This is a self-replicating nanite system designed to break down any organic material and convert it into more nanites. Once released, it spreads exponentially until there's nothing left to consume. We never tested it at full scale, Kevin admitted. But the simulation showed it could devour an entire planet in 6 days. Every tree, every animal, every person, reduced to gray dust and hungry machines looking for more food. Lisa stared at the container, trying to imagine the mind that had designed such a thing. Then she remembered that it had been a human mind. Someone's mother or father or child had sat down and figured out how to end all life on a planet in less than a week. In this one? She asked, pointing to a container marked with more warning labels than any other in sight. Kevin's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Project Last Light. That one we hoped we would never even need to remember. It's a weapon that targets the fundamental forces holding matter together. It doesn't destroy things, Admiral. It unmakes them, removes them from existence entirely, returns them to the quantum foam that existed before the universe had stars. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of humanity's hidden history pressed down on them like a physical force. How many of these are we actually planning to use? Lisa finally asked. That depends entirely on the Vorthax, Kevin replied. But Admiral, there's something else you should understand. When Protocol Omega was activated, we didn't just open these vaults. We also released the classified research databases to every military scientist in human space. Our best minds are already working with this information. He gestured at the ancient containers around them. What you're looking at here is the technology of 150 years ago. Primitive by modern standards. Our current scientists are improving on these designs as we speak. They're combining old concepts with new technology. They're creating things that make these weapons look like antiques. Lisa felt something cold settle in her stomach. So what you're telling me is that this is the mild stuff. The Vorthax made a terrible mistake, Kevin said simply. They poked a sleeping giant. They woke up something that humanity spent 200 years trying to put back to sleep. And now that giant is angry. A young technician approached them, carrying a tablet displaying rapidly scrolling data. Admiral Grant, Dr. Huang. The research teams have already produced 3 new weapon designs based on the unlocked files. One of them is a gravity manipulation device that can crush a starship into a ball the size of a fist. Another is a stealth system so advanced that our ships will be completely invisible to any sensor technology the Vorthax possess. Lisa took the tablet and scrolled through the reports. Each one described something more terrible than the last. Weapons that attacked the enemy's DNA. Weapons that corrupted their computer systems with self-evolving viruses. Weapons that turned their own ships into bombs without any visible cause. How quickly can we deploy these? She asked. The gravity systems are being installed on the first wave of ships now, the technician replied. Full combat readiness. In 48 hours. Kevin watched Lisa's face as she processed the information. He saw the weight of command settling onto her shoulders, the burden of knowing that she would be responsible for unleashing these horrors upon another species. Admiral, he said quietly, I want you to understand something. Every weapon in these vaults was created by humans who thought they were doing the right thing. They were fighting for their families, their nations, their beliefs. They didn't set out to become monsters. They just did what they had to do to survive. Lisa looked at him with eyes that had grown hard. And now we're going to do what we have to do. The difference is that we have a choice, Kevin said. We can stop at any time. We can show mercy. We can remember that we decided to be better than this. He paused. Or we can become exactly what we buried in these vaults. The choice is yours, Admiral. Lisa handed the tablet back to the technician. Prepare everything. Every weapon. Every system. Every horror we've ever created. She turned to leave the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the darkness. But Kevin, I want you to stay close to me throughout this campaign. I want you to remind me of this conversation. Because you're right. We do have a choice. She paused at the doorway, looking back at the endless rows of humanity's buried sins. But the Vorthax chose to murder our children. They chose to laugh at our pain. They chose to believe that we were too weak to respond. Her voice hardened into something that didn't sound quite human anymore. So maybe they don't deserve our mercy. Maybe they deserve to meet the real humanity, the one we've been hiding from the galaxy all this time. She walked out of the vault, leaving Kevin alone among the weapons that had once ended a 60-year war in humanity's darkest hour. Above them, ships were being armed. Scientists were working through the night. And the galaxy was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. The Vorthax fleet hung in orbit around Colony Horizon like a swarm of metal insects, their ships bristling with weapons that had conquered a dozen species across the galaxy. Supreme Warlord Crystal stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Dominance, watching the sensor displays with growing confusion. Where are the human ships? He demanded, his clawed hands gripping the arms of his throne. Our ultimatum expires in 12 hours. Surely they would have responded by now with some pathetic attempt at resistance. His tactical officer, a scarred veteran named Thaxer, checked the readings for the 15th time. My lord, I am detecting no human military vessels within 3 light-years of this system. They appear to have retreated entirely. There are some merchant ships at the edge of the sector, but they are fleeing away from us at maximum speed. Crystal let out a rumbling laugh that echoed through the bridge. Exactly as I predicted. Humans are cowards. Soft creatures who care too much about their feelings and their families. Once faced with real power, with true warriors, they crumble like all the other weak species we have conquered. The bridge crew joined in the laughter, their confidence in their supreme warlord absolute. The Vorthax had never lost a war. Their military traditions stretched back 10,000 years. They had crushed species far more advanced than humanity, far more numerous, far more prepared. What could these emotional, primitive humans possibly do against such might? But something nagged at the back of Crystal's mind. A report he had read years ago during his officer training. Written by a Dominion intelligence analyst who had spent decades studying every species in the galaxy. The analyst had included a special section on humanity, one that had been flagged as paranoid speculation by most readers. Do not mistake human restraint for weakness, the analyst had written. I have studied their history in depth. These creatures fought among themselves for thousands of years with a brutality that makes our own wars look merciful. They developed weapons that could destroy entire cities in single strikes. They created diseases that could wipe out millions. They built machines dedicated solely to finding new ways to cause suffering. The report had continued with growing alarm. If humanity has chosen peace, it is not because they are incapable of war. It is because they looked at what they were capable of and became frightened of themselves. They chose to be peaceful because the alternative was too horrible to contemplate. Do not give them a reason to remember what they truly are. Crystal had dismissed the report as the ravings of a coward. Humans were obviously weak. They had no warrior culture. They spent their time trading and farming and making art. What kind of threat could such creatures possibly pose? "My lord," his censor officer suddenly shouted, his voice cracking with shock. Contact. Multiple contacts appearing on all sides. Crystal spun toward the view screen, his confident smile fading. "What do you mean appearing? Ships cannot simply appear from nothing. They're coming out of nowhere, my lord. As if they were already here, invisible, waiting for us." The main view screen flickered, and then filled with images that made Crystal's blood run cold. Ships. Human ships. But not the modest defensive vessels that the Vorthax had studied and dismissed as primitive. These were different. They were massive, angular constructions of black metal that seemed to absorb light itself. They bristled with weapons that Crystal's tactical computer couldn't even identify, couldn't even begin to analyze how many. Crystal demanded, forcing his voice to remain steady. Thaxer's reply came out as a whisper. 400 vessels, my lord. No, wait, 600. They're still appearing. Still decloaking. Looked up from his console with fear in his eyes. 800 human warships now surrounding our position. Their weapons are charging. A communication channel opened without being requested, and a human female appeared on the main screen. She wore a dark uniform with admiral's insignia, and she was smiling. Crystal had seen humans smile before. It was usually a sign of friendliness, of weakness, of their pathetic need to be liked. This smile was different. This smile reminded him of the expression a predator makes right before it strikes. "Supreme Warlord Crystal," the human said pleasantly. "I'm Admiral Lisa Grant of the Earth Defense Force. I wanted to personally thank you." Crystal's mind struggled to process her words. "Thank me? For what?" "For 200 years, you've been good neighbors to the galaxy. Friendly, peaceful, restrained. We smiled at your diplomats. We traded fairly with your merchants. We pretended to be exactly what you expected us to be." Admiral Grant's smile widened, and any pretense of warmth disappeared. "Do you have any idea how exhausting that was? Constantly holding ourselves back. Constantly pretending to be something we're not. Constantly hiding who we really are." The human fleet began to move, encircling the Vorthax position with speed that shouldn't have been possible. Their ships flowed through space like water, cutting off every escape route with practiced precision. "You've given us a gift," Supreme Warlord Grant continued. "You've given us permission. Permission to stop pretending. Permission to stop hiding. Permission to be what we truly are." She leaned forward, her eyes burning with something ancient and terrible. "I should warn you about what happens next." Crystal found his voice. "You should warn us? You pathetic creatures dare to threaten the Vorthax dominion. We have conquered a dozen species. We have destroyed civilizations older than your entire world." Grant nodded as if he had said something amusing. "Yes, you have. You're very good at fighting species who follow rules, who care about honor, who try to minimize casualties." Her smile became something that would haunt Crystal's nightmares for however long he had left to live. "We're not going to do any of that. What happens next," she continued in a voice like ice, "is not going to be a battle. Battles are things that can go either way. What happens next is going to be a lesson, a demonstration, a message to every species in the galaxy who ever thought about threatening humanity." Crystal tried to respond, but his voice had stopped working. On the sensor display, the human fleet had completed its encirclement. 800 ships formed a perfect sphere around his position. Every weapon pointed inward. "You attacked our colony without warning," Grant said. "You murdered our children. You laughed when we asked for mercy. You told us we were too weak to matter." Her eyes narrowed. "You were wrong. And now, Supreme Warlord, you're going to find out exactly how wrong you were." "One more thing," she added as the communication channel began to close. The rest of the galaxy is watching this. We made sure of that. Every species with sensor capability is receiving a live feed of what's about to happen. They're going to see what we do to those who threaten our people. She paused, and her final words hit Crystal like a physical blow. We want them to see. We want everyone to understand. Humanity didn't become peaceful because we were weak. We became peaceful because we were afraid of what we might do if we ever had a reason to fight. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. You gave us that reason. And now, the galaxy is going to remember why we chose peace in the first place. The channel closed. The human fleet began to advance. And Supreme Warlord Crystal, conqueror of a dozen worlds, realized with dawning horror that he had made the worst mistake in the history of his species. He had woken something up. Something old. Something patient. Something very, very angry. And now it was coming for him. The Battle of Horizon lasted exactly 17 minutes. The Vorthax learned why humanity had spent 2 centuries hiding its true nature from the galaxy. They learned why humans had locked their weapons in underground vaults. They learned why every species should have read those old intelligence reports more carefully. Admiral Lisa Grant watched from the bridge of the Reckoning as the first wave of weapons deployed. Thousands of small missiles streaked across the void, each one carrying a payload of nanites from Project Harvest. The Vorthax point defense systems managed to destroy perhaps 1 in 10 of them. It wasn't nearly enough. The missiles that got through didn't explode. They simply made contact with the enemy hulls and released their cargo. Within seconds, the affected ships began to change. Their metal surfaces rippled and shifted as billions of microscopic machines began taking them apart atom by atom. The Vorthax vessels didn't explode or burn. They dissolved, their crews screaming as the walls around them turned to dust. Project Harvest deployment successful, reported Tactical Officer Danny Ortiz. His voice professionally calm despite the horror on the view screen. Vorthax fleet integrity at 73% and falling rapidly. Deploy the psychological warfare drones, Lisa ordered. Small devices scattered through space, like seeds blown from a flower. They were barely larger than a human hand, but each one contained technology that had been banned by every human government for over a century. The drones slipped through the Vorthax shields without resistance because they weren't weapons in any traditional sense. They carried no explosives, no radiation, no physical payload. They carried nightmares. On the bridge of the eternal dominance, Supreme Warlord Crystal suddenly stopped moving. His eyes went wide, and his mouth opened in a silent scream as the neural disruption field penetrated his brain. All around him, his crew experienced the same thing. Each one saw something different. Each one saw their own personal hell brought to vivid, inescapable life. Thaxer, the tactical officer, saw himself back on his home planet during a war from his childhood. He watched his family die again and again in an endless loop, their screams tearing through his consciousness. The sensor officer saw himself falling into an infinite void, alone, forgotten, abandoned by everyone who had ever known him. The helmsman believed he was drowning in an ocean of blood while invisible creatures tore at his flesh. "My lord, we need to retreat." Someone managed to shout through the chaos, but Crystal couldn't hear anything. He was trapped in a memory that the weapon had found buried deep in his subconscious. The death of his eldest son, killed in a training accident 20 years ago. He relived that moment of receiving the news over and over, feeling his heart shatter anew each time, unable to look away. Unable to escape, in the space around the crippled Vorthax fleet, human ships began the next phase of the assault. The newly developed gravity weapons activated, creating artificial singularities that lasted only fractions of a second but were more than enough to do their work. Vorthax warships that had survived the nanite swarms were suddenly crushed into spheres of compressed matter smaller than a human fist. Their crews never even had time to scream, for the gravitational forces reduced them to paste. Dr. Kevin Huang monitored the battle from a research vessel positioned safely behind the human lines. His job was to document everything, to create a record that humanity would keep forever. A reminder of what they were capable of. A warning for future generations. Human forces are demonstrating weapon systems that the galactic community has never encountered. Spoke into his recorder, struggling to keep his voice professional. The Vorithax fleet is being systematically dismantled using a combination of self-replicating nanotechnology, psychological warfare, and localized gravity manipulation. Enemy casualties are approaching total. He paused to watch as a Vorthax dreadnought simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, its weapons still trying to fire at targets it could no longer see. The next moment there was nothing but empty space where it had been. Project Last Light had been deployed, and the weapon that unmade matter itself had performed exactly as designed. Note for the record, Kevin continued quietly. We haven't even used the really dangerous stuff yet. What we're deploying today is considered moderate by the standards of human military capability. The weapons that remain in reserve are significantly more destructive. On the surface of Colony Horizon below, the surviving human colonists huddled in their shelters and watched the sky fill with falling stars. Each streak of light was a piece of a Vorthax ship burning up as it entered the atmosphere. The invasion force that had murdered thousands of civilians just days ago was being erased from existence. Marine Captain Zoe Patterson led her rescue team through the ruins of the main settlement, pulling survivors from the rubble that the Vorthax bombardment had created. Her team moved quickly and efficiently, medical personnel treating wounds while combat troops secured each area before moving on. Command, this is Captain Patterson, she reported through. Get her communication device. We've secured the colony center. Rescue operations are proceeding. What's the status of the orbital engagement? The response came from Admiral Grant herself, her voice carrying through clearly despite the distance. Captain Patterson, there is no more orbital engagement. The Vorthax fleet has been neutralized. Patterson looked up at the sky at the debris that had been an invasion force capable of conquering worlds. 17 minutes ago, those ships had been preparing to finish the destruction of everything she was trying to save. Now, they were nothing but ash and memory. Casualties on our side, Admiral? Patterson asked. There was a brief pause before Grant replied. 0. We suffered 0 casualties. The Vorthax never managed to land a single hit on any of our vessels. Their weapons couldn't track ships they couldn't see. Their shields couldn't stop weapons they couldn't understand. The Admiral's voice carried a hint of grim satisfaction. It turns out that when humanity actually tries, space combat becomes fairly straightforward. Back in orbit, the human fleet began the process of securing the area. Rescue ships descended toward the colony to assist with recovery efforts. Medical vessels prepared to receive wounded civilians. And in the debris field that had been the Vorthax invasion force, search teams began looking for survivors. They found Supreme Warlord Crystal drifting in an escape pod alone, his mind shattered by the psychological weapon that had shown him his worst fears for what had felt like an eternity. He was alive, but just barely. The proud warrior who had laughed at humanity's weakness was now a broken shell, whimpering and twitching as fragments of the nightmare continued to echo through his damaged brain. Admiral. Grant ordered him brought aboard the Reckoning. She wanted him to survive. She wanted him to witness what came next. She wanted the Vorthax Dominion to understand exactly what they had awakened, because the Battle of Horizon was over. But humanity's response had only begun. The fleet that had destroyed the invasion force was already receiving new orders. New coordinates. New targets. The Vorthax had come to human space with weapons drawn. Now humanity would visit the Vorthax with weapons that made theirs look like toys. Dr. Kevin Huang finished his recording as the fleet began to move toward Vorthax territory. He looked at the data on his screens, at the casualty figures and the weapon effectiveness reports and the estimates for what would happen when these same tools were turned against the Vorthax homeworlds. Final note, he said quietly. Humanity has proven today that we could have been the dominant military power in the galaxy at any point during the past 2 centuries. We chose not to be. We chose peace because we were afraid of ourselves. He paused, watching the stars streak past as the fleet jumped to faster than light speed. That fear was justified. What I saw today was not warfare. It was extermination. And we're only getting started? The galaxy had been warned. Now, it was time for the lesson to continue. 3 months after the Battle of Horizon, the Galactic Confederation called an emergency summit on the neutral station of Meridian Prime. Every major species in the known galaxy sent representatives. The meeting hall was filled with diplomats, military leaders, and heads of state from civilizations that had existed for thousands of years before humanity had even developed fire. All of them wanted to talk about the same thing. All of them wanted to understand what they had witnessed. All of them wanted to know if they should be very, very afraid. Admiral Lisa Grant stood at the central podium, her dress uniform immaculate, her expression calm and unreadable. Behind her, a massive screen displayed images from the past 3 months. The Battle of Horizon, the human advance into Vorthax territory, the systematic dismantling of every military installation the Vorthax had ever built. The Confederation chairman, a towering creature from a species called the Melori, addressed the assembly with a voice that trembled slightly, despite his best efforts to appear commanding. Admiral Grant, the Confederation demands an explanation. The weapons you deployed against the Vorthax violated 17 different accords on acceptable warfare. You employed psychological weapons that drove enemy soldiers insane. You used self-replicating nanotechnology that consumed entire ships and their crews. You deployed devices that appear to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself. Lisa nodded calmly. That's correct. Where did these weapons come from? The chairman demanded. How long have you possessed such capabilities? Why did you hide them from the galactic community? We've had these weapons for over 2 centuries, Lisa replied, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. We developed them during a period of internal conflict on our homeworld, wars between human nations that lasted for decades. When those wars finally ended and humanity achieved peace, we looked at what we had created and felt ashamed. She paused to let that sink in. We locked everything away, sealed the vaults, classified the records. We decided that no species capable of building such horrors deserved to spread across the stars without first proving they could be better. So we became better. We chose peace. We chose cooperation. We chose to show the galaxy only the best parts of ourselves. The chamber erupted in chaos. Alien voices shouted over each other in dozens of languages. Some demanded to know why humanity had deceived them. Others insisted that such weapons should be destroyed. A few simply sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what they had just learned. Lisa waited patiently for the noise to die down before continuing. Every species in this chamber has looked at humanity for the past 200 years and seen a young, emotional, somewhat primitive people. You've tolerated us. You've traded with us. Some of you have been kind to us, but none of you have respected us. You've assumed that because we chose peace, we were incapable of war. Her voice hardened slightly. The Vorthax made that assumption. They attacked our colony without provocation. They murdered 30,000 civilians, including children. When we protested through diplomatic channels, they laughed at us. Their ambassador called us weak and told us to accept whatever they chose to take from us. She let the silence stretch for a moment. They were wrong. And now, for the first time, you all understand exactly how wrong they were. The seats reserved for the Vorthax delegation were empty. The Vorthax Dominion no longer existed as a political entity. After the Battle of Horizon, human forces had pushed deep into their territory. Not to conquer, not to occupy, but to dismantle. Every military base had been destroyed. Every weapons factory had been reduced to atoms. Every warship had been turned to dust by weapons the Vorthax couldn't even detect, let alone defend against. The Vorthax people still existed. Humanity had been careful to spare civilian populations whenever possible. But their military capability had been permanently eliminated. Their ability to threaten anyone, human or otherwise, had been removed with surgical precision. Let me be very clear about something, Lisa said, her gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives. Humanity has no interest in conquest. We never have. We want to trade, to explore, to learn. We want to build relationships with other species. We want peace. She paused, and when she spoke again, Her voice carried the weight of everything humanity had proven over the past 3 months. But we are no longer going to pretend to be harmless in order to make other species comfortable. We are no longer going to hide what we're capable of. The vaults we sealed 2 centuries ago are now open, and they will stay open. The Mallory chairman leaned forward. Are you threatening the Confederation, Admiral? No, Lisa replied simply. I'm informing you. You can be our friends. You can be our partners. You can be our neighbors. We would prefer that. We genuinely want peaceful relations with every species in this galaxy. Her expression became something that made several of the assembled diplomats flinch. But understand this clearly. If anyone threatens humanity again, if anyone decides that our people are easy targets, if anyone believes that our kindness is weakness, we will not respond with measured force. We will not follow your rules of acceptable warfare. We will respond with everything we have. She gestured at the screen behind her, where images of the Vorthax military being systematically erased continued to play. And as you can see, what we have is enough to unmake civilizations. What we showed the Vorthax was actually our restrained response. We held back. We could have done much, much worse. The chamber was utterly silent. Not a single representative spoke. Not a single question was asked. Are there any objections to humanity's continued membership in this confederation? Lisa asked. There were none. 6 months later, humanity was formally elevated to permanent senior membership in the Galactic Confederation. No species objected. No species even suggested that perhaps the young, emotional humans might not be ready for such responsibility. Every treaty that had previously been negotiated on terms unfavorable to humanity was revised. Every trade agreement was renegotiated to be more equitable, and in the vaults beneath Mars, most of the weapons went back to sleep. The doors were closed again, though not sealed. The records were archived but kept accessible. Humanity returned to being the friendly, cooperative species they had chosen to be. But everyone remembered. Everyone understood. Admiral Lisa Grant retired to a small house on Colony Horizon, which had been rebuilt and was thriving under clear skies once again. The settlement had grown since the attack, as humans from across Earth's space had moved there to be part of the community that had sparked humanity's awakening. A memorial stood in the center of town, listing the names of everyone who had died in the initial Vorthax assault. Sometimes, late at night, Lisa would walk to that memorial and read the names. She would think about what humanity had done in response to their deaths. She would wonder if it had been the right thing to do. She would question whether becoming the monster they had always feared was justified, even in the face of such provocation. And sometimes, she would look up at the stars and wonder if there were other species out there who might one day make the same mistake the Vorthax had made. Species who would see humanity's kindness and assume it meant weakness. Species who would attack human colonies and expect humans to simply accept it. Part of her hoped not. Part of her hoped that the lesson had been learned. That no one would ever force humanity to open those vaults again. A smaller, darker part of her knew better. The galaxy was vast and full of species who believed that strength was the only thing that mattered. Sooner or later, someone else would test humanity's resolve, and when that day came, the vaults would open again. The weapons would wake, and the galaxy would be reminded once more. Why humanity had chosen peace in the first place? It wasn't because they couldn't fight. It was because when they fought, they were terrifying. Lisa smiled at the stars. A smile that contained both sadness and something harder. Then she turned and walked home through the quiet streets of the colony that had survived because humanity had finally stopped pretending to be something they were not. The demons were sleeping again, but they were always ready to wake up.